Great lawyers don't always know how to build great law firms. Let's change that. Join Ben Gideon as he shares hard-won lessons from building his own financially successful law firm and practical insights from top law firm entrepreneurs, business consultants, and more. This is a podcast for lawyers, by lawyers. Welcome to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. Produced and powered by Law Pods.
Today's episode of the Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm podcast is brought to you by Supio. I just spent an hour doing a webinar with the Supio folks. It was great. We had the head of business development and also one of the lawyers from Texas who's been an early adopter of Supio and walked through some case models of how you use Supio to put a case together. It was very, very impressive. I would encourage everyone who doesn't yet have an AI platform for their law firm, if they're a plaintiff's side, personal injury, medical malpractice type of law firm, check out Supio and get the demo. Our podcast today is also brought to you by Vision Spark. Vision Spark is the company that helps law firms and other businesses find seconds in command. You know any seconds in command, Jeff?
That would be me. It's exactly where I want to be.
When I think of number two, I always think of Jeff.
Thank you, Ben. I appreciate that.
We have Vision Spark to credit for the search process that led us to Jeff, and then Jeff has led us to the holy grail of, it appears, to doubling our revenues in less than a year of your time at our firm. So it's all paid off very well. Anybody who needs a second in command like Jeff, I would encourage you to talk to Vision Spark. Our podcast is also brought to you by 1% for Planet. 1% for Planet, folks, is the organization that allows you to contribute 1% of your gross revenues to environmentally conscious nonprofits. Our firm has done that. It's a great organization that's allowed us to partner with some really terrific nonprofits in Maine and throughout northern New England, and we really would love to have other firms join us in that. And if you do join us in 1%, please reach out to us and we'll give you a plug on the show.
Welcome, everyone, to Elevate, Build, and Grow Your Law Firm. I'm Jeff Wright, Chief Operating Officer at Gideon, and as always, joined by Ben Gideon, founder, owner, partner. How are you today, Ben?
Doing great, Jeff.
Good.
How are things? Just finished our first quarter retreat.
Yeah, had a good first quarter retreat, and a hectic first quarter, and heading into a probably a hectic but good second quarter. Everyone's
a hell of a good first quarter, though, I have to say.
A hell of a good first quarter. Yes, yeah. Our the litigation team is hitting on all cylinders, so it's exciting, and everyone is busy as hell. It's probably the best way to do it. But I'm looking forward to our podcast today. This is for me, this is an exciting topic, and I think an important one as well. So, title of the podcast today is How to Build a High-Performance Legal Team. Recruiting, hiring, training, and compensation. I think part of the reason why I like this is, as you know, Ben, and some people that have been listening, I was in the banking world for 20 plus years and probably met with thousands of business owners over that time. And when I always asked business owners what their biggest challenges were, it was always one of two answers. It was either accounts receivable, which we're not going to talk about today because I don't think we have the magic formula to get insurance companies to pay us quicker, or hiring the right people. And those were always one or two from every business owner. And here, hiring the right people is arguably one of the most critical things that we do and talk about as a senior management team.
Yeah, and I mean, that falls into two broad categories, in my view, lawyers and non-lawyer staff. And you could divide up non-lawyer staff even further than that. But I do think there's certainly lots of overlap in the principles behind the hiring of each of those two different broad categories. But we really want to focus in today on the lawyer side of that equation.
100%.
Because after all, I mean, the ability to provide high-level legal services by a law firm is going to depend to a significant extent on the lawyers.
Mm-hmm. So
There's
I guess,
no other way around it.
yeah, there is no way around it. So I guess what you've been on your own, I guess, for lack of a better term, at Gideon Asen for roughly 5.5 years now. And I'm sure along the way, you didn't start probably with a very good process for hiring, my guess is, out of the gate.
That's true. We hadn't thought a lot about hiring as a process initially. I think that, our first lawyer that we hired that was not Taylor or I, the two founding partners, came to us and approached us about wanting to have a job at our firm. We weren't even recruiting or affirmatively looking to add lawyers at that time. And that's Meryl Poulin, who we've now made a third partner in our business, but she was persistent in wanting the job. And ultimately that persistence led us to relent and agree to hire her. So we weren't recruiting, we weren't actually looking to hire a lawyer or to grow. Every lawyer after Merrill has been the product of wanting or feeling that we needed to add another lawyer to our team. And that sort of has evolved from, our initial process was to look around at the landscape of our home state and kind of figure out who Taylor and I or Merrill, knew as lawyers that we thought highly of or had good reputations, maybe had some overlap or transferable skills with what we did. And then we would approach people to see if they were interested in working at our firm. So we weren't really actively advertising or recruiting for a lawyer. We were cherry picking individuals based on someone we thought might be a good fit. That isn't a bad strategy, actually, because you're employing some criteria and not just going out to the marketplace at random to see who comes in. You're finding someone you think you would like. The problem that we ultimately found with that strategy is we ran out of people that fit that description that we knew in our home state, Maine, which is a small state, and that were both available or potentially available, and that we also were targeting as somebody that we were interested in. So then what do you do? That's kind of where we were out of answers.
Yeah. So how did you shift from the roadblocks of being in a small geographic area and probably having pretty specific criteria on what you and Taylor were looking for? So how did you shift from kind of the local recruiting to find talent?
Jeff, the real shift we had in a mindset of what a good hiring process looks like came in the process we followed to hire you. And I'll turn it around on you in a second. I could just say that also, like many things that you do as a new business, it wasn't an intentional strategic choice that we made. It was born out of circumstances. So the person that we had assigned the role to temporarily serve as our chief operating officer came to us completely out of the blue and gave her notice and said, I'm leaving. I quit, basically, but I'm going to give you some time before I leave to find my replacement. And I have to say that was one of the worst days of our lives in this business because, even though it wasn't perfect, we felt like we had a workable leadership structure in place for our firm. We were finally kind of getting some things right, making some headway, keeping our head above water a little bit. And then all of a sudden that whole structure was crumbling down with the leadership team and a senior person leaving. So at that point, we just decided, look, we need to find a different way to recruit high-level candidates for the top positions in our firm. And that's where we went to Vision Spark and developed a process that led to hiring you. And that it was through learning how we did that process, we were then able to replicate that in other hiring decisions we made after you. And we have really in all of our hiring since you followed a much more deliberative and robust hiring process, particularly when it comes to hiring lawyers.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, the nice thing was, because I obviously saw it from the other side, but I think it started with a well-defined job description, which I assume you probably wrote a draft and worked with Vision Spark on. And then from there, it was really an in-depth process between Vision Spark and interviews here, you know, proprietary tips assessment on the type of personality that you're getting to see if it was going to be a good fit. And I know it's something we're probably going to talk about later, but a lot of people hire off of skill set or off of what they see on the resume and forget about the personality, forget about the culture fit. You know, and that's something that we've kind of put first on our list, is to look at personality and culture fit and kind of skill set second.
Yeah, and it seems so obvious, but we weren't doing it before that process, which is before you go out to the market to hire somebody for any position, but particularly for a lawyer position, you want to clearly define what the role is that you're hiring for, and not just functionally what that role is, but what are the characteristics you're looking for in the person to fill that role? What are the personality traits you want? What are the skill sets they need to have? Because how can you possibly identify the right person for the role if you haven't clearly defined what the role is? Mm-hmm. And so we spent, in the CEO search job, we spent a lot of time clearly defining what that role was going to be. And part of that came out of our failed experiment with our prior COO, where we hadn't done that, and it wasn't clear to anybody in the office what role that person was serving, which is why, despite having a COO that predated you, Jeff, that person didn't really manage the business the way you do. We were still managing it actively as the owners. People were still coming to us with all of the day-to-day operational issues and problems because we hadn't defined that role. And in fairness to the person who had the role, she didn't know what the role was because we hadn't defined it for her either. And we also hadn't given her the right backing, support, or authority to fulfill that role. So it all kind of goes together. And so that process of really working up the job description in a very detailed way, which, as you alluded to, also includes a list of our core values. So every job description we publish and advertise for not only says functionally what that role requires, what skills, capabilities, training, experience, but it also says what are the character traits and values we're looking for in that person. And not only does that process allow us to identify the right candidate for the job, it actually, probably even more importantly, it allows candidates to self-select to apply for the job. Because what we find is people that our job descriptions are really also advertisements for our firm in a way, and they're also motivational documents that for the right people are inspiring to read. They speak to people. We've had many people apply for jobs to say, I wasn't even looking for a job, but when I read your job description, it just spoke to me. It made me, recognize the value I bring and that these people share that value, and I want to work for a place like that. The place where I am now doesn't see the value in that, but this place does. And so we've had a lot of people that apply for jobs that self-select as applicants. And at the flip side, I imagine there are many people, we don't know them because they haven't applied, but they're self-selecting in the other direction and not applying. So not wasting our time, because when they read the job description, they recognize they would not be a good fit.
Right. Yeah. And, you and Taylor have entrusted me where I'm kind of I don't want to say the gatekeeper or the first line of defense, but, regardless of the position, whether it's an attorney position, paralegal, administrative assistant, I'm the one that manages the process of getting it out there. And then I vet the resumes first. I do the preliminary phone calls, and I find, I've had calls with attorneys, first phone calls that have gone an hour and a half. And I would say half of our discussion is about our culture, about our environment, about our core values and our goals and what it's like to work here. And I think it's important for them to hear that from me and for me to hear from them what their thoughts are on that before we get into, they have med mal or they have personal injury or they have plaintiff side experience. Yeah, 50% of the conversation is not something you can get off a resume. And it's important. And to your point earlier, I think people lose sight of that.
Yeah, and I think the other thing people who are recruiting lose sight of is that just like everything else we do, trying to attract high quality cases and new clients or trying to persuade a jury, the process of recruiting staff and attorneys is a sales process. You have to sell people on the benefits and value of working for you. And there's nothing, as you alluded to at the very outset, there's nothing more important than having the right people, in the right seats on your bus, to use that analogy. And how do you get the right people? Because it's a competitive marketplace for talent. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, every law firm wants the best lawyers. And why would they come here instead of going across the street? You have to make your case. And for us, it's a combination of things we offer people for the right person, and we can get into what that is. But for the right person, it's a very attractive opportunity that they can't get anywhere else. And so it's not a hard sell for us, but it's only not a hard sell if we're effectively communicating what those opportunities are, because people don't know. How would they know unless we tell them, right? So it's a really important part of the process. Think about what most job announcements are, even for lawyers. We're hiring a litigation attorney, competitive salary, needs, 3 to 5 years experience, send applications to. Well, that doesn't get you jazzed up and excited to apply for that, does it? There's nothing about that sets that job opportunity apart from any other opportunity. That's not how we present our job opportunities. So
yeah, we usually have 2 paragraphs of firm description and culture and core values. And the whole there's nothing about experience on, I think, the first page of our job postings. That comes at the tail end. And we do that for a reason, because we put what we feel are the most important things first in there. We get to the experience after.
Need help on a complex personal injury or medical malpractice case? Gideon Asen accepts case referrals and regularly co-counsels with lawyers nationwide on high-value claims. The firm has recovered millions of dollars in cases that competitors turned away because they dig deeper. Ready to learn more? Email bgideon@gideonasenlaw.com to start the conversation. Gideon Asen shares fees as permitted by the laws of each state. Don't let complex cases overwhelm your practice. Elevate justice together with Gideon Asen.
So getting to maybe you could just describe a little bit how we just hired another attorney.
Mm-hmm.
we had attempted to go more old school by mining the local talent pool. That didn't work out for us. We recognized, and one of the things we learned from hiring you is the need to cast a wider net. Although you're from Maine and live here on the ground, we had many applications for your job from outside of Maine, all over the country, actually. But you want to just talk a little bit about that transition and how we were looking for a lawyer this time that broadened that net a little bit?
Yeah, 100%. So like you had mentioned, I mean, when you and Taylor first started hiring, you tapped the local pool of people that you knew and proactively reached out and networked. So we tried to do the same thing, with our most recent attorney hire. And we had a number of interviews, good candidates, just not an individual that we felt was the exact right fit. And, so we decided to go and try and track down a recruiter. I interviewed, I think, 3 different recruiters, and the one we landed on, Chris, has been fantastic. And I think what we liked about him most is when we met with him, he asked about our culture. He asked about the firm. He asked, what our day-to-day is like and how people are going to fit in. And we cast a wide net, and we were lucky enough to get a candidate from well outside of Maine. And they're starting in May, and we couldn't be more thrilled. But we took a lot. One of the things, and we could probably talk about it more, is patience. I mean, it took us in the neighborhood of 5 months from our initial posting to making an offer and having an acceptance to bring that right candidate in. And I don't know if firms or businesses that don't have a well-defined hiring system would have the patience to wait for the right candidate. We would have loved to have had somebody in here 3 or 4 months ago. We have plenty of work. Our trust me, every attorney here would be more than happy if we brought somebody in earlier, but the wait is worth it. And I think the patience and you can have the urgency, but you can't rush it.
Yeah, so I would say we have toyed with the idea of using legal recruiters in the past. Legal recruiters there's pros and cons to it, and I think they're very, individual recruiters can be very different from one another. Depending on what kind of law practice you have, recruiters can be more or less valuable. One of the challenges in using recruiters for a plaintiff contingent fee practice, where a lot of the lawyer compensation is based on incentive-based bonus structures, as our firm is that many recruiters base their fees on a percentage of the lawyer's first year starting salary. And what they really want to be doing is finding transfer partners at large firms or senior associates at large firms that command a high base salary, because that's a big payday for a recruiter. The kind of candidate, the kind of position we were recruiting for, doesn't have a high base salary, although with incentive-based pay, there's very good opportunity for very high compensation for the right person, but the recruiter doesn't benefit directly from that. And we're also asking recruiters to find a candidate for what would be a more difficult to place position in an out-of-the-way small rural state at the end of the country. Again, it's not the low-hanging fruit. So what you will get is a lot of recruiters who will say, yeah, sign me up. And they'll, put out a blast email to everyone they know. And if they happen to get a candidate, they'll put them your way and, get paid on it. But they're not really willing to beat the bushes and do real work to try to develop a candidate pool for you. that's what the Vision Spark folks did when we hired you. They did real work. They developed a candidate pool. They cast a wide net. They took affirmative, proactive steps to recruit people, not just, see who came in the door through sort of mass advertising or blast emails or something, right? So we had to go a different route. The person we have been using as a recruiter, Chris, he has a different structure. So we're paying him a flat fee. So it's not based on a percentage of salary. It is contingent on him finding us a candidate that we hire. So, but that fee guarantees that he's going to be paid for the work that he does. And then we had some creative and I thought quite effective ways at trying to identify candidates who might be good for both qualified for what we're looking for, but also where there was a higher likelihood that they might be willing to accept a position at a firm in Maine. So using social media, AI, you can now mine Facebook, LinkedIn, other social media for people who have family in Maine or New England, have maybe went to high school or college in Maine and left, or law school in Maine. So somebody who has some connection to either the state or the general area, and then also maybe in a practice area that is either the same or has transferable skills that would make them a good candidate. So because the likelihood of somebody, in Los Angeles who has no connection to the Northeast and no connection to Maine, giving up their high paid job in an LA firm and going 3,000 miles across the country to work for us, pretty low, right?
To none. Yeah.
But the candidate we ended up finding, who had great credentials, former U.S. attorney, former working for the Department of Justice, good educational background, other strong, academic skills. This person, turns out, has parents who live in Maine, has a daughter who's about to start college in Maine, himself grew up in neighboring state of Vermont. So there was a lot of areas of overlap where that possible transition from out of state here potentially could make a lot of sense for him. So, again, if you're strategic about it and you know what you're looking for, and we understood that we needed to have that connection, you start to narrow the pool using AI now that can screen through all of this data instantly. You're able to develop a pool of candidates that where there's a higher probability that you might be able to recruit somebody effectively from that pool. And then you need somebody like Chris who's willing to just call these people. And that's what Chris did. He got on the phone and just called people, had a connection to Maine, had the right credentials, seemed to have the right level of experience. And, you might have to make 50 or 100 calls before you get one or two people that are interested. But if you get the right one person, you've done that job. And in this case, we did.
We were, I don't even want to say cautiously optimistic. I mean, it was a heavy lift that we asked for him. Find us a litigation attorney that wants to relocate to Maine, like you were saying. And I think from the time we signed with him to the time he found us the candidate and we had a signed job offer letter was right around 2.5 months. And I was blown away at how quickly it happened because I was skeptical. But we've just posted for another position and we went, right back to him. It was interesting. I did want to talk about our previous hire, before our most recent. And I think it goes back to knowing what you want, having a very well-defined job description and having the patience. Our hire in January, Stephanie, who came on, had previously applied for another non-litigation attorney role here. And we interviewed her, very good credentials, great interviewer, extremely intelligent, good attorney. And we realized, we love everything about her, but this isn't the right role for her. And so we decided, and actually Ben was the one that really had the epiphany, because the rest of us were a little enamored with her background and everything. And Ben said, she could be successful here, just not in this current role. And so, I in addition to doing the upfront, I always have to call the candidates and turn them down as well, which isn't the best part of my job. And I told her that we loved everything about her, and this just was not the best role for her. We wound up hiring another candidate, which worked out great. But I left it with her that, hey, if we have another role that we think suits your skill set and you're, available, would you mind if I reached out? And I don't know, I would say, roughly 6 months later, we were hiring a litigation attorney. We reached out, and she's been here since January, and her first 5 months have been very event filled for her here in a good way. She's got a lot on her plate, and we're more than thrilled to have her. But all of that stemmed from knowing what we wanted, having a very defined idea, a very defined job description, and then us working together to make what we feel is a well-informed decision.
Yeah, no, that was a great example of another really successful hiring process that, again, took a long time. We had to be patient. The right role wasn't available when she originally applied and then became available. And that's another example, though, of somebody, her background for the last 13 years was she was the general counsel for the largest primary care medical practice in our state, and been working closely with doctors, working on medical malpractice litigation, but from the provider side. But she had a background. Her dad was a plaintiff's lawyer in another state. She started her career as a plaintiff's lawyer at another firm. She definitely had the fire in the belly for it. I think she was excited to get back into the litigation world on our side of the table. So she was not somebody looking for a job. She had a very good job, a highly compensated position. I don't think she would have applied to plaintiffs' firms generally. She applied to our firm because she saw something about this practice that appealed to her and from the job description, actually. I think she said that she read the job description and, it really spoke to her in a way that motivated her to make what would, is a considerable life change from a very comfortable corporate position with complete job security to, working as a plaintiff's trial lawyer. So it kind of makes the point we were trying to make earlier.
Yeah,
I wanted to go back and just talk about a little bit about the kind of context of lawyer hiring to begin with. So when we think about when firms are thinking about hiring lawyers to scale and grow their practice, which is the subject matter of this podcast, there's really, I think, two models you can follow to hire attorneys to accomplish that goal. One is that you can hire seasoned lawyers that have all of the knowledge, skills, and experience to completely shoulder the burdens of independently performing the legal services you're hiring them to perform. In other words, they don't need any additional, they might need training on your internal procedures or systems, but they come in as fully fledged lawyers in whatever field that you're hiring them for. The other alternative is you're hiring people that are not fully fledged lawyers, that are still learning or still need to learn skills or develop capabilities in order to fully grow into that role. And those are very different. And I would say there's probably a third, which is hiring baby lawyers, we call them, the ones that are brand new right out of law school, who don't really have any experience at all, aren't really tried or tested doing any legal work yet. We basically exclude that last category. For a firm of our size, we're now up to, with our new hire, 8 lawyers. We just can't afford to have anybody who doesn't have at least a critical mass of usable skills that can contribute immediately to the work we're doing. It just doesn't work for us. We're not a hourly rate firm that's leveraged off of billables. So for large firms where every new lawyer unit is a profit generating source, that works, right? They can hire the new associate, bill them out at, $250 or $500 an hour. It costs the firm $100 an hour to employ them. That's a good business model, but doesn't work for us. Right. So depending on what kind of firm you have, you might hire baby lawyers, you might not. We're not likely to hire baby lawyers in our firm. So it really leaves us those two options: the fully fledged lawyer capable of doing everything independently versus a lawyer who still needs to grow. In our particular line of work, there aren't many people that qualify as the fully fledged, independent, capable lawyer that not only are that, but also that you would want to hire, or that would be a good cultural fit for your practice. Because particularly in the plaintiff's world, very few people ever matriculate to be that type of lawyer because it's hard and few people get to that level in their career. But the people who do tend to have extremely large egos, number one. I'd probably count myself among some of those, but they have large egos. They have big personalities. They're demanding. And, if they're successful in what we do, they're already highly compensated wherever they are, at a different firm, their own firm, whatever. And so the cost of bringing someone like that in is, A, you would have to pay them an arm and a leg, probably, because they're already doing quite well wherever they are. B, you would have to tolerate their ego and their demanding nature and personality. And they're not likely to be team players in the sense of subscribing to a new culture or new model that you want to impose on them, because they've figured out something that already works for them. Now, there could be exceptions to that, for sure, but you can't really count on finding somebody like that, in my view, that's going to be a good fit and allow you to scale a business where your goal is to have a profitable business. I mean, frankly, from a partner standpoint, to be profitable for me as a partner, I don't want to give away all of my money to some other large ego plaintiff's lawyer if I don't have to. If the right person came, we'd consider it. But again, it's not something we're seeking to necessarily find. And there's no great model of individual out there that is a natural fit for that. So that really leaves you with that last category, which are lawyers that are in that transitional phase, that they have a certain number of skills, but they're not fully fledged, first chair trial lawyers that have been trying, numerous cases to verdict successfully over their careers. And when you're bringing in a lawyer like that, what you're looking for is, are they the right piece in the puzzle that is the full set of capabilities you're trying to build out in order to do the legal services work, right? And so we've built out teams. So when we're looking for a lawyer to add to a team, we're not just assessing what is that individual lawyer's skill set and capabilities, but are they the right fit to compensate or to supplement the other skill sets of the other members of that team and the other personality traits of people that are on that team. Now, will they be a good fit personality-wise to work together collaboratively with their other team members? And part of that process is we have started to implement this, what you alluded to before, Jeff, the TIPS psychological assessment, which assesses in an objectively validated fashion both intellectual capabilities and baseline IQ type qualities and also personality traits. And I have to say, I'm the kind of person who would be, I think, inherently skeptical of that type of test, but I've actually found it extremely valuable in helping us to assess candidates. I don't know what your thoughts are about it.
Yeah, I've obviously I've never taken that particular test because it was designed specifically for this firm, but I've had to take personality tests in the past, and I think you hit it on the head with the word skeptical. I was like, all right, it's worth about as much as the paper it's printed on. But it's not the case, and I think what's great about it is, after I was the first applicant, or my role was the first role that the firm used it for, and after that, Ben and Taylor had every attorney here take it, and we've developed a really good baseline of what we're expecting our applicants to score and what ranges. There's categories on there of like Ben had stated, of intelligence, but it's also, things along the line of working with, how urgent are they and how their communication style is and things like that. And amazingly, all our attorneys here really fit within the scales, like 1 to 10. And all the attorneys here, aside from 1 or 2, that may be outliers in some categories, fall within 3 points of each other. And if we see candidates come in that are real outliers in those categories that we deem important, it's enough to raise enough of a red flag for us to have more in-depth discussions around those areas and come up with some additional questions to try and dig into it. I think it's been invaluable.
Yeah, and one example is we tend to have a high level of urgency in our firm. People like to move quickly on things and get stuff done. It could be very hard if you have a team of people that are urgent and action oriented for somebody to lack that sense of urgency or that sense of action, because you just become frustrated with the person. They're not working at the pace that the practice moves. And that's one of the things the test analyzes, is someone's level of urgency. And another thing I've found useful is, when you do a job interview, for that hour you're spending with somebody, they're putting on their best performance. We all know that, right? They're projecting themselves in a certain way, and it's very hard to get a real sense for what they're really like, because this may be atypical of how they typically are, but they're just able to do it for that hour that you're in the interview. And one example is we interviewed a lawyer who I was very personable, conversational, did a good job, was a good interviewer, but scored a 1 out of 10 on introversion. And basically meaning that this lawyer is a painfully shy introvert, which means they're the kind of person who their instinct is always going to be to close the door, to work alone, not to reach out, not to ask questions. And it's just hard for somebody like that to collaborate effectively in a team environment, because they just are really introverted. And now if we were hiring that person for a second chair research and writing job, where their job was to, be down in a dark room in the basement and just be doing research and churning out memos or something, that might be a good personality trait for that. But we weren't hiring for that. We were hiring for them to be a co-counsel collaborator as part of a litigation team, working hand in hand with another lawyer on valuable cases. And so again, it didn't mean that one answer on a personality test disqualified that individual, but it causes you to take notice and then to follow up and to ask questions about that and to really drill down on, is this going to be a problem? And you're not going to learn that from your job interview. You're just not, because even that introvert is going to be able to get out of their introversion for an hour and pretend to be, gregarious and communicative with you in a job interview. So it's just very hard to figure some of that stuff out without this.
Yeah, and I remember vividly one of the questions on mine. It was something along the lines of, what was one of your proudest moments as a supervisor, something along those lines. And I remember talking to the recruiter. I had answered it and everything, and she goes, there's right and wrong answers to that question. And I was like, well, how can there be right and wrong answers, right? Everyone's going to have a different, sense of pride in different things. And she said a lot of people answer that their proudest moment as a supervisor is, they blew out their team blew out their sales number or finished 110% to goal or whatever. And she said the correct answer is the answer you put down, Jeff. One of your proudest moments was a staff person that you really believed in, and you coached them up, and they actually wound up leaving where you were working, and they got a relatively high profile job, and you were so proud that you were part of that because you helped kind of mentor them along their career. And she said, that's the right answer, not something else that someone else put down. And, the fact that these people are trained to read into things like that is the type of insight, to your point, you don't get from an hour interview, or even, on the third interview, you're not going to get. It's interesting. And it's helped us tremendously. And we've, I don't want to say we've been lucky, but we've made very smart hiring decisions based on a lot of factors.
I agree. Yeah. And it's just like, it's like everything else you do. I mean, we go back to the episode we did on decision making generally, but we try to apply that rigor to the hiring process. And again, it's something I think lawyers fall into the trap of. We're all so busy doing our legal work that all the other surrounding things you have to do to build a business are kind of second thoughts. And we apply a lot of rigor to the casework we do, to the legal services we provide. But I think traditionally lawyers don't necessarily apply the same rigor to other parts of the business. But the fact is that, I mean, you said we've been lucky, but I don't think it's lucky. I think we make our own luck by having a rigorous process and insisting on following it and not compromising our standards, knowing what we're looking for, and continuing to work at it until we accomplish the goal. So it's really no different than any other aspect of what we're doing. But I mean, think about the hiring. What is more important than who you're putting in those seats in your office, especially in the seats that are going to be client facing and are going to be representing you as a law firm in front of the courts, in front of your clients, every single day. There's nothing possibly more important than that decision. So if you're going to invest any time and rigor in something, it ought to be in hiring the right people to work for you.
Yeah, the cost of a wrong hire is it's almost immeasurable. I mean, it's not just monetary, it's the time, it's the training, it's everything else. And to your point, it has to be one of the biggest priorities that firms have out there, and it has to be done right.
So we had some other things that we were going to cover today, but I think we're out of time. But just to preview them, because they're natural segues from our discussion today, and they're actually integral in what we were just talking about. You can't separate the hiring process from the other things that we'll cover. And those two other things are training, lawyer training, again, specifically, because again, if you're not hiring the fully formed lawyer that can operate completely independently, then there has to be a program for training that lawyer once they arrive. So that's one topic that we will cover in a subsequent episode. we've been giving a lot of thought to that lately, and we've developed some interesting and novel approaches that we're going to be rolling out at our firm actually next month, or actually later this month, right?
Yeah.
And then so the training, and then the other part of it is compensation, because you really can't separate hiring from compensation. In order to attract and retain high quality lawyers, you have to have a mechanism for compensating those lawyers, because after all, people who work hard and do a good job deserve to be well compensated. And it's a competitive marketplace, So how do you structure compensation in a way that provides the right incentives for the lawyers, doesn't overpay people who are underperforming or underproducing, pays people appropriately and generously if they are performing and producing well, continues to incentivize people as they mature and grow into your practice over time, and doesn't cause your best talent to head for the door at some point and leave and open up a law firm across the street. So there's a lot that goes into that. And I should say we're a firm where we currently don't have any equity partnership track. So that creates an additional challenge, because you have to be able to attract and retain top talent without offering them equity partnership in the business. So we will cover all of those topics, which become fairly detailed.
Yeah.
In a subsequent episode.
I can't tell you how many hours we spend on attorney compensation plans behind the scenes to try and get it right. Hundreds.
Yeah,
hundreds of hours.
Yeah, and and we'll get to it in our future episode, but that came out of trial and error, having problems with earlier iterations of our compensation plans. I think we've got something that will work well long term, and we've got it pretty much right, but it still may require some tweaks. But I think we've put so much thought into it that hopefully by sharing that, we'll be able to help others get to the right point without spending as much time and creating as many problems as we did along the way. So with that, I guess we'll call it a day. Thanks, Jeff.
All right. Appreciate it, Ben.
Thanks for listening to Elevate, Build and Grow Your Law Firm. Share with colleagues if you found it valuable. Remember, building a successful law firm takes discipline, strategy, and determination. But you're not alone. Produced and powered by Law Pods.